I'm glad you're here this South. From up north, with our sweet tea and our good food. So they may want to stay a little longer, but we're glad to hear. And I'll turn it over to Dave.
Thank you. I'm Ken Alberts. This is David Couch. As the chair mentioned,
just 1 second.
I'm sorry.
I don't have any idea how quickly this will move, and I apologize, but I have a luncheon meeting at 11:30, so I'll have to. And I'll come back if it's still going on, but if I get up and leave, that's why.
Completely understand.
Okay, well, our flight is not until 5:30. we are good to probably about 4 o'clock. We just got to catch a taxi. And we do have a lot to say. We're really excited to be here. And we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to come and talk to you about this program. This actually does excite us, and I'll apologize if I jump up. I get really excited when I present it. If I jump up, I'm used to pointing at the screen a lot. Don't be alarmed. I'm going to go through just kind of a little bit of background about what it is that you've promised, what it is that your contract holders are going to pay, and then what it is that Mpact is going to pay out. A little spreadsheet kind of takes you through it in a very simplistic term. So I want to make sure that you really understand the math behind the program in a simple form. It's not going to be real complicated. We're not going to give them a lot of higher math, but just kind of give you the background on which everything else is built. I'm also going to give you a little bit of contrast between this kind of a program and a defined benefit program, defined benefit pension plan program. And then David is going to go into the executive summary of our audit results, findings, and then after that, we're going to look at our tool that the treasurer mentioned that kind of looks at some what-if scenarios. Now, we actually prefer that if you have any questions that you interrupt us. We think it works better if we are able to adapt our presentation to your concerns. So please do not hesitate to interrupt us. And like I said, I get a little excited. I talk a little fast sometimes, but just get our attention and take us in any direction you need us to go in. We're here for you.
I appreciate that. And he truly needs to interrupt him because there's so much information. If you try to keep your questions to the very end, you're more than likely won't remember what it was because it's so detailed. So feel free to. Some of the treasurer staff that has been so engaged working with the team, feel free to jump in to miss something.
What I'm going to start you with, this is actually your pricing report from your prior actuary, and I just want to focus on this number right here. It's $25,886. That's a lump sum cost for a 12th grader as of September 1st, 2012 for a 4-year senior college. I want you to keep in mind that number, $25,586. The other number I want you to look at is for the 2-year college. $46.99. This number here. Now each year you get a pricing report from your actuary, and they tell you what the lump sum cost is. And this is for somebody that's a 12th grader, so you basically have a 1-year or 0-year investment horizon, depending on when the contribution comes in during that last year of high school. And then the benefit is going to start being paid out practically immediately. So what I have here is an illustration of what's going on. I'm going to go through a couple of explanations of terms here. I'm going to stand up just because I'm restless. We've got something here labeled a WAT, W-A-T. I think David's going to go into a little bit more detail, but I'll just give you the synopsis of the WAT. That stands for Weighted Average Tuition. For all of the schools, public schools in Mississippi, we do a little calculation that averages out the tuitions for the current years. And we said that's what we call the WAT. For people that are not going to a public school who participate in this program, that's actually the benefit you're going to pay out. When you calculate that number, that's what somebody who's going to go to a private school is going to get reimbursed, or somebody who's going to go out of state will get reimbursed by that number, the WAT calculation. Now, for somebody that stays in the public school environment, they'll get the actual tuition that the school that they're going to will charge them. And we've got the 4-year WAT of $61.45 and the 2-year WAT of $22.30. When we calculate the price to pay for a 4-year or 2-year school, it's based on a 7.8% interest rate. And what you're going to see up there, you can say, well, that's 7.3%. That's kind of odd. Why are we 0.5% less? There are administrative expenses built into the program, and David's going to talk a little bit about that. That's one of the things that we looked at. So in order to pay for the administrative expenses in the pricing, Your actuary reduced the assumed rate of return from 7.8% to 7.3% to cover those administrative expenses. So in this scenario, we've got also a tuition increase assumption of 6.5% for 4-year colleges and 6% for 2-year colleges. We've got somebody that's a 12th grader, so they're around 17, and that watt is 6145. It just increases by 6.5% each year. So what you've got there, the 4 years or the 5 years of tuition there, only 4 of them would actually pay. You got 5 years of tuition there. That's just the assumed increase. We're expecting as a program, when we're going to pay out that the tuition that we have today will increase by 6.5% each year for 4-year colleges, or, and I forgot to put the starting number. Actually, it's not so wrong here. Or 6% for the 2-year colleges, starting at 22.30. This benefit, 65.44 or 23.65, is payable 1 year in the future. Because the person's in 12th grade, they won't get that for 1 year. And so we're going to take the present value of that. Basically says, well, what is the amount of money that we need at the start to pay for that? In the first year, we're expecting contributions to come in at the end of the year. So in the first year, there's no interest discount. So what we're going to pay out, the tuition, is the present value. In the second year, 6970, when it has 1 year of investments that can add to our pot of money. So we can assume that we only need 6496, and if we get 7.3% interest on that, that'll grow to 6970. Here, we've got 6447. That grows for 2 years at 7.3%. That'll yield 7423. So we get the last 4 years of present values, we add that up, and that adds to our lump sum cost, 25,886. And these numbers will differ just slightly from what was on the your current actuary's numbers, because these don't include, there's a $3 charge for every year the contract precedes matriculation. That's not shown in this illustration. So over here we've got $46.99, and we can change this age, basically any age, starting from 0 to 17, and we can see how the costs change. Now the lump sum for an infant basically would be $22,794 or $38.19. So it actually goes down, because what we're looking at is the difference between the tuition increase assumption and the interest rate. That difference is basically what the program is paying out in terms of a real rate of return to the participant. Now, this program is a lot like a defined benefit plan, but there are some key characteristic differences. One of them is the investment horizon. Your average participant is starting in this program about 7 to 8 years prior to matriculation, prior to going to college. And then the benefit payout is either 4 years or 2 years, with some variations for some people that have selected for full programs. And so you've got about a 7 to 8 year pre-benefit payout investment horizon and a 2 to 4 year post-benefit payout period. That's a lot different from a pension plan, where a career might be anywhere from 10 to 25 or 35 years, and the payout's going to last over the person's lifetime, which could be anywhere from 20 to 40 years. And so you've got a lot longer investment horizon. One of the other key differences in a pension plan, like PERS, Mississippi PERS, is that you've got member contributions and employer contributions coming in to supplement the investment income. And to the extent that the investment income isn't there, you can adjust one or both of those other contributors to make up for the differences. In this program, we have contractual money coming in that doesn't get adjusted after the contract starts. And so there's an additional risk that our assumptions aren't realized with no adjustment to provide additional revenue in the event that losses are incurred, in the event that our assumptions are too optimistic for one short period or multiple short periods. And so it's important to take a look at this. It's not uncommon to have these kinds of audits done basically in the defined benefit world. And it's really a good idea to have a second look at these, to review the program. You know, things have changed since this program was put in place in the 90s. The environment has changed. And we want to make sure that this program is sustainable going forward. And so we've looked at different aspects of this. We've made some suggestions. We've recommended some changes, and we hope that you'll take a look at this. And we think that we make some small changes now, well, and then put in a process to continually review the program. We'll have a program that's going to be sustainable over the long term. And with that, unless there's any questions, I'll turn it over to David. Put this, I believe, is also on your screens. I'll just put it up here for convenience.
And you should each have a hard copy. I'll be going to hard copy. First of all, I'd like to say about the audit report. We focus on two main things in the audit report: the actuarial calculations that go into pricing these contracts, the lump sum that Ken just determined, and also the annual actuarial evaluation that we do to measure the fiscal health of the program. In short, I want to be clear that this is a clean audit. We were able to match the current actuaries' calculations very much within tolerance. We understand the processes that were used. We will go into detail on a lot of the underlying assumptions. Part of this is an educational thing for you. We think that it's very important for the trustees to be engaged, especially in the pricing process, in understanding what the assumptions do and do not achieve in terms of pricing. I'll go through the executive summary. I encourage you to read the whole report if you haven't already, and I would be very happy to drill down to any level of the report if you want to jump to some specific page. Feel free to grab it at any time. But I'd like you to turn to the first page of the executive summary, which is Roman numeral 1-1. I will spend most of the time talking about the pricing aspect of calculations. The valuation is really more of the same. So the pricing is the critical point. In determining the price of the contracts, Ken went through the example for you where the main assumptions are going to be your investment return and your tuition increase. I'll go through those in detail. There are also a lot of other underlying assumptions and processes that do affect the calculations. So let me just start with the first bullet. The investment return assumption is 7.8% per year. When we look at the investment return assumption, on a forward-looking basis, assumption is assumption. It is essentially a guess of what's going to happen. We try to make it our best guess as to what's going to happen, but there is a wide range of possible outcomes. When we look at a rate of return assumption, we try to imagine the range of possible outcomes, and we generally pick between, looking at percentiles of outcomes, something between the 25th and 75th percentiles of outcomes. That's actually a very wide range. The 7.8% is certainly well within that range. When we looked at it on a short investment horizon, 8-year investment horizon, consistent with what Ken was describing your program pretty much has, the chance, on a forward-looking basis, the chance of hitting that return assumption we calculate to be approximately 43% of the time. So in other words, you're more likely than not to fall short of that 7.8 in the long run. The median expectation on a forward-looking basis is 7%. The median means there's a 50-50 chance of being above or below that. Now, keep in mind that, this sounds very precise when I say 43% or 50%. It is, again, these are all based on assumptions. These are looking at your current portfolio allocation, looking at capital market expectations for each of the asset classes, looking at expectations of future inflation, and running the odds on all of those outcomes. If you make a change to your investment policy, that can change the direction of the rate of return assumption. It's important to note that since the inception of this plan, the rate of return that the fund has achieved is 4.8%. So that gap, that 3% gap over a long period of time, that does accumulate. That is a significant reason for the current unfunded situation in the plan.
And I'll just jump in because I like to talk and my buddy here. In a defined benefit plan, when you have a situation like that, like most of the defined benefit plans in the public sector around the country have experienced that in the decade of 2010s. But they have a tool that you don't have. And that's, they do an annual evaluation and say, okay, well, we incurred a loss last year, so we're going to increase the contributions either to members or the employers next year to account for that. You just don't have that lever. So this becomes a very important point.
Right, and the idea of we set an expected return, any year you're going to actually deviate from that. There's a risk. Risk can be positive or negative, that you'll be above or below that. But it's kind of saying you don't have a mechanism for making up any of that downside risk. You price these contracts assuming 7.8%. That's actually part of the promise now. You have told the people that buy this program that they're going to pay whatever contract fee they pay, and that's going to, for them, earn 7.8%. You have to match it in the fund. So, in a sense, the risk of falling below doesn't fall on the contract holders. It ultimately falls on the full faith and credit of the state. For reference, the last line of the comment is that if you were to change the assumption in the valuation from 7.8 down to 7, that median return, the unfunded liability would be above 100 million. It's currently around 80.
Yes.
So again, anytime you lower the assumption, that means you're assuming less investment return in the future. You need more money today.
Question, please. Is like going to the PERS model of being able to increase the contribution from the employer to or the employee? Is that part of what's contemplated in terms of changing the law for management of the system?
Well, it would certainly be looking at how we structure our pricing, how we may readjust some liability.
Is there any need to change the law on that point?
I think we can do it under the current.
I think that would be the infusion of cash option that we've discussed.
Yeah.
Okay, so, all right. No, there's no legal issue with that.
No.
Okay.
We don't think, I don't think anybody thinks it can actually go back to the contract holders though.
Right. The contract holders that are in place right now, they are currently will receive those benefits that have been agreed upon. But going forward, there would have to be adjustments made, new pricing.
Okay. Thank you.
The second comment on this page is discussing the use of a single interest rate in terms of pricing using that 7.8%. Again, thinking about the risk associated with these, it is possible to use a varied interest rate or a step interest rate, partly because of the shorter investment horizon. You think about the way a bank issues a CD. If you take a short period CD, they have a low interest rate. The longer the period, they'll actually offer a higher interest rate. So the same sort of idea would be a possibility here in the pricing, is to use a lower assumption for 5 to 7 years for the rate of return and then step it up in the future. The principle behind wanting to do that is, again, covering some of that volatility, protecting from some of that downside risk. In any given year, the rate of return, the risk on the investment return is very, very large. The longer the horizon, that risk does sort of narrow. So you're essentially, you would effectively charge the contract holders in advance for some of that risk.
I think this is also a little bit of an equity issue. Kind of think about this in terms of if you were selling a CD and somebody came to you and bought a 1-year CD, their interest rate would be lower than somebody that came to you and bought an 18-year CD. And that's kind of similar to what you're doing here. Somebody that comes in and buys a contract for an infant, you have an 18-year period for their investments. And so you're much more likely to hit that before you start paying benefits out. So you're much more likely to hit your average, or what you think your average is. Somebody that comes in as a 12th grader, you have a bigger risk of not hitting that average in any one single year, and then benefit payments start. And so you basically, if in fact you incur a loss. Now, granted, we're not talking about the gains because nobody's upset if there's a gain, but that's equally as likely too. You could have a gain and everybody's happy. But if there's a loss, you have no mechanism to make that up other than someone else's gain. And so it's all about that risk that we're taking and basically charging for it.
The next assumption is the tuition increase assumption. Currently in the pricing model, we use a single tuition increase assumption for each 4-year and the 2-year. As Ken illustrated in this example, 4-year colleges are assumed to have a 6.5% per year tuition increase. 2-year colleges get a 6% increase. That's built into the pricing model, so that's the expectation of what is actually going to occur. In any given year, the tuition increases are higher or lower. If an actual tuition increase is lower than expected, then the system as a whole has a gain. You've essentially collected money assuming a 6.5% increase, but you don't need to pay out that much. And vice versa, if it goes the other way, if it goes above the 6 or 6.5, the system experiences a loss. That assumption, typically actuarial assumptions are aimed at hitting the long term. In the long run, we believe 6.5 or 6 is where the tuition increases are going to end up. You can have short-term fluctuations that are known and acute that might be different than that long-term assumption. We've had recent years where the tuition increases have been much higher than 6 and 6.5%. Part of that can be the state of the economy. Part of that can be reduced funding from the state for the institution, so that the tuition itself has to increase to cover that gap. So you could build some of that into the pricing. If you think there's going to be a short-term sustained period of higher increases for new contracts, you could build that into the contract pricing so that those members are essentially paying for that expectation of higher tuition. With the idea that, again, it would be a stepped assumption. You'd have a short-term high tuition assumption that would gradually grade down to a more long-term assumption. So those are illustrations about how you do have flexibility in the pricing. You do have flexibility in how you protect for some of the risk in the pricing based on these underlying assumptions. To get into deep into the weeds a little bit more, the next item is talking about incidents of benefit payments, refunds, and changes of beneficiary. These are some of the details about how the contracts actually work. The illustration, the pricing model bases it on the assumption that people are going to enter the contract, they're going to make their payment on time, they're going to go to college for 4 years and be done. The reality is more complicated than that. Things can happen during the years of school prior to matriculation, and things can happen in school to change the career. There are activities such as people can cancel the program and take a refund. People can change beneficiaries. All of these activities can affect the cost, sometimes positively and sometimes negatively. I don't remember what I was going to say about that.
Well, I think one of the things we've talked about is delinquency. When we first put this report together, we were concerned because it looks like you have an opportunity to encounter a large cost with regard to delinquency. So let me just explain what delinquency is. Basically, somebody enters a contract and they're making payments. So instead of taking the lump sum option, they're financing it over a period of years.